What is up, guys? Bobgar here, and today we're going to look at the top 10 modern cards in Hour of Devastation. This is the top 10 cards that I think might make an impact in modern from Hour of Devastation. None of these first three cards on this page actually are on the list. I just put them in because they're some of the cooler cards in the list. I think Nicol Bolas is way too expensive for Planeswalker with multiple colors, unfortunately, and the gods are probably too expensive too. I think the Scarab God probably is the best bet. Recurring Reanimate ability is pretty good, and he's a pretty good control threat that recurs, and some incidental scry and damage in control decks is definitely pretty good. And then Scorpion God does, you want him to work, right? He's like almost a fixed Skull Clamp or something. Almost. And, that is certainly powerful, but probably not broken enough to be worth 5 mana, and his abilities are kind of expensive, so I don't think any of these guys make it, but I wanted to show them on the opening slide anyway, just because they're kind of iconic. And we're going to jump into the honorable mentions here. So I'm going to run through these real quick. I'm not going to spend too much time on the honorable mentions. These are cards that almost made my list but didn't quite. Steward of Solidarity, the only reason this one is here is a 2-mana 2/2 that can create 1/1s. It has a combo with Intruder Alarm. Then there's a bunch of other cards that combo with Intruder Alarm that have never been good enough for Modern, at least in any real competitive sense. But I think they haven't been 2 mana. I could be wrong. But yeah, going this into Intruder Alarm gives you infinite tokens on turn 3, which is powerful. I don't think it's good enough. I don't think it's consistent enough. It's too easy to just remove this creature from the battlefield and stop the combo that way. So yeah, I don't think it's really worth it. And I just, on its own, it's not a very good card. So I don't think this one makes the list. Fraying Sanity, super cool card in a mill deck, but and I think you'd want it in like not so there's some mill decks that kind of like try to burst damage at you, and I think that kind of deck you probably wouldn't want to, but in ones where you're running Hedron Crab and things like that are gonna mill your opponent slowly over time, this could be a good 3-drop. It doubles the damage from that, so it doubles the speed at which you do things. The problem is you can't drop it till turn 3, and it's an absolutely terrible top deck late game if you're out of other things to do. So I think for those reasons, it can't really make it into that deck. 3 is pretty late game in Modern, and you don't really want to do nothing on turn 3 that you then can't really activate till turn 4. So I don't think Fraying Sanity will make the cut. Samut the Tested, as I saw pointed out by some other people, I think Saf and Olive pointed out, this has a combo with Doubling Season. So if you have Doubling Season out first and you play this down, you can instantly ultimate it, and it's basically a tooth and nail ultimate. So that's super powerful, but I just don't think even in those style decks you would really want to run it over something like Nahiri that can just tutor out Emrakul and swing with it the same turn. This can get Planeswalkers, which is nice, so you could use this to also get Nahiri, so it could be Nahiri, 5 and 6 or something, I guess. But I don't know, I just don't quite see it making the cut even in that kind of fringe playable Planeswalker deck. That's not really like a tiered deck, but it's fun and can win matches, and people like to play those decks, so I could see it showing up in Modern every once in a while. And I think it could show up in Modern every once in a while. I just don't think it's in the top 10. And then Reason to Believe, I think this is a card that's probably not on a lot of people's lists. I think a 1-mana Scry 3 is better than people think, and I think Believe would be good enough to see fringe play if there were more ways to set it up in Modern. So if there were, I think the big ones would be things like Brainstorm and Top, because you really want to set up the first couple of cards, your top couple of cards of your library, and then use Believe to put it in Emrakul. I just don't think there's enough consistent Scry in Modern to do this in a way that is consistent and then also doesn't hinder the rest of your deck. And 5-mana draw 1 is obviously terrible, so if there's not a creature card that's 5 converted mana cost 5 or greater on top of your deck, the Believe side of this is absolutely terrible. So I think it's too hard to set up, but I have to honorable mention any card that can put Emrakul directly into play pretty much. I mean, that is a big game if you can do it. All right, and then this is kind of honorable mentions. I've seen people talk about these cards in Modern. They don't make my list because they are really sideboard only cards, and I think you might see some of them in a few sideboards. Life Goes On and Liliana's Defeat, and honestly the whole defeat cycle, there's a bunch of the defeat cards that could see sideboard play. I don't know if they're actually better than the sideboard cards that Modern already has, but but a few of them could see some play. Oquetra's Last Mercy, I think, probably won't, although against Burn, yes, it's true. Resetting your life total is worth being tapped out for next return. I mean, 3 mana, gain almost 20 could be worth it. But again, the only way these would see play is in sideboards. You would never main deck any of these as far as I can tell. I just don't. I guess I shouldn't say never, but it's hard for me to see a world where any of these are main deckable. All right, and then on to the actual list. Let's do it. So coming at number 10 is Hostile Desert. So Hostile Desert is a 3/4 manland that you can turn on for 2 mana. It comes into play untapped and taps for colorless, and the cost to turn it into a 3/4 is not only the 2 mana, you also have to exile a land card from your graveyard. So I think this is pretty good, but there are 2 reasons that I don't actually think it is likely to see modern play. So the big ones are it has pretty steep competition in things like Mutavault, and even though 2 mana isn't super expensive for a 3/4 until end of turn that, you know, has some utility and survives sweepers, the number of decks that this can go in as a colorless card is pretty limited. I think, especially because you have to put lands in your graveyard, the one that jumps to mind is like Dredge. And I mean, paying 2 mana for 3 damage in Dredge on turn 2 isn't terrible. I mean, maybe it's worth it if you already recurred all your guys back and you just get to swing for a little extra. It gives you a little extra power on turn 2 or 3, but it also definitely isn't amazing. I think Dredge is the one I can see just getting lands incidentally into their graveyard pretty quickly, but it also has pretty tight mana requirements, so it doesn't want to run a lot of colorless spells. The decks that want to run a lot of colorless spells like Eldrazi-tron and things like that don't put a lot of lands in their graveyard, so it doesn't really fit there either. So it's one of those ones I can see showing up in Modern, but it's hard to see where it would fit, and it's hard to think about the decks that would take it over Mutavault, because any tribal deck would certainly take Mutavault over it. And Affinity is the other deck in Modern that would run a lot of colorless mana, and it has a bunch of better options because it has manlands that turn into artifacts in Inkmoth Nexus and Blinkmoth Nexus. So yeah, I just have trouble seeing where it fits in, but it does seem pretty powerful. So I wanted to put it on the list as something that could show up somewhere someday. Then at number 9, Supreme Will. I think this is better than people are probably giving it credit for. Not that people are slamming it or anything. I think a lot of people think it's standard playable, but I don't think many people think it will make its way to Modern, and it probably won't. I actually think this is a pretty weak Modern set, and most of these cards will probably not show up in Modern, but in a control deck, options are extremely good. Yeah, it sucks to pay an extra mana for your mana leak, which makes this card a lot worse, but it also sucks to draw your mana leak turn 9 or 10 when your opponent has 6 mana in play and the mana leak is never going to be useful, and this turns that mana leak into an Anticipate, which is pretty awesome. And even just turn 2 or 3, if your opponent knows you're holding up a counterspell and doesn't want to play into it, this turns that into a turn where you can start smoothing your draw and drawing to the things that you want to enact your game plan. So I think it's better than it looks. I think it's probably not good enough for Modern, but I could see it as people running a few of it in various, white-blue control decks or blue-black control decks or things like that. All right, so that's Supreme Will. That's number 9. Number 8, Leave to Chance. So Leave to Chance is a super interesting card. It has return any number of target permanents you own to your hand. So the first thing I think of when I see this is Retract, which is a 1 mana blue that lets you return any number of artifacts to your hand, and this is used in combo decks like Cheerios. Obviously at 2 mana this is worse, but Cheerios was actually running, most versions I looked up ran 1 to 2 copies of Hurkyl's Recall, just because it wanted more of those Retract style effects. That's really just to bounce its own artifacts to hand so it can replay them. And this is the same mana cost as Hurkyl's Recall. Yeah, it puts you in a second color, but almost all of the color in Cheerios is are lands that tap for any color anyway, and is not super relevant, but those decks do have a tendency in certain matchups to get stuck, basically. And in matchups where you're stuck because they've killed your first, Pure Steel Paladin or Srem, Senior Edificer, Chance gives you a way out at 4 mana to basically draw a completely new hand and see what you get. So I think I think it's better than people might give it credit for in that deck. I still don't think that... So that deck was around for like 2 or 3 weeks, and people were like, holy crap, it 5-0'd some leagues. It's really good. And then it kind of vanished off the face of the earth and hasn't really been around much. So I think it will potentially see play in these fringe playable decks. It would be really cool if those decks did come back and did really well, but I don't think that's too likely. But I do think this card is better than some of the cards it was running. So if those decks do come back, this could be a card that they would want to run. That's what I think about it, at least. Let me know if I'm way off on this one. This was one of the ones that I included that I don't think I really saw anybody else talking about, and that's the reason. I think that works. And there's some other weird decks like Beck Call decks that run a whole bunch of 0-cost creatures and shove those out, or elves that can tap for mana and shove those out. So yeah, I mean, it could see some play in some things like that. On to number 7. What do we have at number 7? We have Striped Riverwinder. This one is in there. It's a 5/5 hexproof for 7, which is pretty bad rate, but it has cycling 1 blue. And I've heard people talk about, will this make it in Living Endless? And I am a Living End player. I have tried splashing blue on some versions I ran online for the Sphinx from the last set that cycled for 1, and I think the cost of splashing blue is still too great. The deck is already a 3-color deck, and the other 3 colors are pretty needed. The best cyclers are in black and red, and then the best Cascade card in Violent Outburst, which is the best because you can do it at instant speed. It makes it much better than the other ones that are out there. Is in green, is green-red technically, so it kind of forces you into those 3 colors, and I tried splashing a 3rd color for things. It wasn't terrible. You don't have to run that many cards if you're just willing to run 4 fetches that can, tap for blue. You can just run 1 or 2 shocks, but it was still a little hard on the life total, and it's a deck that does have some trouble against aggro decks. It does have the sweeper for creature-based aggro decks, but it dies pretty hard to burn if it doesn't go off turn 3, for instance. And if it's taken a whole bunch of damage from pain lands of various sorts, fetches and shocks, it just might die before it can even get to turn 3 or 4. So yeah, I don't think it's going to make it, but it's on the watch list of could make it. I actually didn't think some of the cycling cards from Amonkhet would make it, and they definitely did. They were quite good, in fact. They've definitely put Living End on a new level. They've kind of upped it from a tier 3 to a tier 2, I would say. It's still not tier 1 deck, but it's better than it was. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they added a bunch more 1-mana cyclers that are really good. I guess for the most part, it wasn't that I didn't think they'd be good, it's that I just didn't pay enough attention to the cards coming out in the set. So that's number 7. And then number 6, Uncage the Menagerie. This is a tutor that it's, pretty undercosted. Usually tutors in Modern these days are 4 mana. And yeah, I guess this is technically 4 mana too. If you want to make it useful, you really want to pay 4 mana and tutor 2 cards, or maybe 5 and tutor 3. But the fact that you can tutor basically a full combo, like Devoted Druid and Vizier of Remedies for 4 mana, feels pretty good. Yes, it would be a lot better if it was an instant. Yes, it would be better if the creatures came into play. In fact, if this was an instant and brought creatures directly into play, this card would be straight broken, and you should start buying them up now. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that, and it does have a restriction where it only grabs creatures with converted mana cost X, not X or less, so it doesn't enable too many combos in Modern, but it does enable some combos in Modern. It'll be interesting to see if this makes sense to run in decks that are running things like Court of Calling and Collected Company to help get those combo pieces or not, but it does get all 3 important combo pieces for the Vizier of Remedies combo, and it does it at 4 mana, so you can do this turn 3 with Birds of Paradise and then play out the combo turn 4. Not the best, but could be good enough to make some appearances, at least in budget versions of those style of deck. So yeah, I think it's super cool. I hope it does well. I'm not sure if it's good enough. The bottom 5 are all kind of like might show up but not sure. And now we're on to the top 5, starting with number 5, Nimble Obstructionist. I think this is on a lot of people's watch list. Flash flying 3/1 for 3 is not great, but fine. Does a really good job pressuring planeswalkers. Does a good job of just like being a control finisher. We've seen Vendilion Click do this role a lot over the years of just finishing things out for control at instant speed. And its secondary cycling ability is super cool in control decks. So when you cycle it, you can counter a target activated or triggered ability you don't control. And that makes it super sweet for stopping people breaking fetch lands, stopping planeswalker activations, stopping Eldrazi triggered abilities, and a ton of other things. So it's definitely powerful to be able to counter a activated or triggered ability like that and draw a card. 3 mana is a little steep, and I think the big problem is it doesn't do both. And it feels like that's a lot to ask of a card, but the problem is there's already cards in Modern that kind of, you get the best of both worlds. Vendilion Click comes in as a 3/1 with Flash, and you get to use its super cool ability to either strip the best card out of your opponent's hand or get rid of a junk card in your hand and draw again. Snapcaster Mage basically is a 2/1 finisher for 2 that lets you recast the card out of your graveyard. And I think those just fill the role that this would want to fill better. So I don't think it's going to show up very much. It might show up more in sideboards than it does in mainboards, but it certainly has the ability to be a budget option for those kind of blue control decks that want to do a lot of countering and do things at instant speed, but also need a couple cards to do some damage and finish out the game. All right, so that was number 5. Number 4, Scavenger Grounds. Scavenger Grounds is super interesting. I actually think this is probably the most likely card in the list to show up in Modern. And the reason is there's a bunch of decks out there that can run it for very little extra effort. And if the meta is like it is kind of now, where Living End, Dredge, and Storm are all relatively popular, and or other graveyard decks are relatively popular, you can just mainboard this card in things like Eldrazi Tron and just take out one of your other flex slots and just have mainboard Graveyard Hate that costs you nothing and mostly is just a land for you. And I think that makes it one of the most playable. The reason it's at number 4 is because even though it's probably one of the most likely to see play in Modern, it's one of the least extreme impacts. It's kind of a very small impact of just being like a sideboard card that, because of the way it works, you can also mainboard it and just have a turn 3 exile your opponent's graveyard. I guess it exiles all graveyards, but most of the decks that it goes in don't care about exiling their graveyard, so it shouldn't matter. Shouldn't matter too much. I mean, the big question is, what utility land does Eldrazi Tron or whatever take out to make room, and then is it better than just simply mainboarding Relic of Progenitus? It's certainly better if you don't need it. So if you don't need it, Relic of Progenitus is just a card that gets in your way. You have to pay 2 mana to cycle, basically. And this is, if you don't need it, this is just a land that you would have drawn anyway. It's just, you put this in instead of a Waste or instead of Seagate Wreckage or something like that. So in that case, it's definitely better, but it is a little slower and harder to activate. You don't get to activate this till turn 3, so it has that disadvantage. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I think this one has one of the best chances to show up in Modern in general. And then let's move on to number 3. Number 3 is Solemnity. So a lot of people have talked about this card. It's definitely a good sideboard card. It just hoses some combos. It can do a good job in some matchups. But the reason it's number 3 on the list is not because of the sideboard nature of it. It's because it does have some combos in Modern. The big one that I've heard people talk about is with Phyrexian Unlife. Phyrexian Unlife says having less than 0 life doesn't lose you the game. And if you would take damage when you're below 0 life, you gain poison counters instead, which would eventually lose you the game. But Solemnity makes it so you can't get counters. So this basically locks your opponents out of ever killing you unless they get rid of one of these 2 enchantments, which it seems pretty good. It seems like it could go in Ad Nauseam or Enduring Ideal without too much effort. They both run Phyrexian Unlife usually anyway, so definitely could make it in those style decks. Kind of fringe playable still. Like I don't know if Ad Nauseam is really going to want it, and Enduring Ideal is kind of a fringe deck, but I definitely think this could show up in Modern. All right, number 2. And now we're getting into the kind of cool ones that I think have a real shot of showing up. Ramonap Excavator. Oh god, that's a mouthful. This could be used in white-green hate bears as a Crucible of Worlds you can Aether Vial in. That pretty much says it all to me. That's a deck, like, I could see white-green hate bears, which is a deck that already is going to be running, Leonin Arbiter and Ghost Quarters to just kind of try to strip mine your opponent, to kind of give your deck an additional strip mine lock. And I think that is super powerful. I don't know if it's good enough to work in Modern. I don't know if people are going to want it over just other things that they would be doing anyway. I just think it is, strong a strong thing to do, and I could see it working. And it also could just be good in the normal land denial kind of decks that you often see. So I think this one has a real chance of being a good card. I don't exactly know what those decks are going to look like, but yeah, white green hate bears is kind of my thought of where it should go, because it feels like a hate bear and it combos with some other cards that are in that deck already, like Ghost Quarters. I mean, even without Leonin Arbiter, a lot of people's mana bases are so hungry that Ghost Quarters become strip mine after 1 or 2 uses anyway. So yeah, I could see this being pretty decent. All right, so that's the number 2 card. Finally, number 1, Claim to Fame. I mean, I've heard people say that this will be a super good card in Death Shadow, and Death Shadow is already one of the best decks in the format. And when you're talking about a new card in the best deck in the format, I think it's hard to not put it at number 1. How many of copies of this will actually be run in the Death Shadow deck? Probably not many, but I get why they like it. For 3 mana, you get to bring back a Death Shadow, which will probably come back in as a, 8 or 9 late game, and then pay 2 more mana, give it +2/+0, so it turns into an 11/9, and you swing with it the same turn. This is just going to end games. This is going to be over. So I can definitely see why they would want a few copies of it in those decks. And I think it could be good in some other decks too. Well, let me stop and say, you can also obviously get back Snapcaster Mage with it for 1 mana, and then Snapcaster back a Lightning Bolt for another mana. You can get back Tarmogoyf with it. There's a lot of cards that in Modern that it hits that are 2 converted mana cost or less. It gets back Dark Confidant, which is pretty nice. And then there's also the combo cards it gets back. I mean, we're talking about Vizier of Remedies combo. One of the big problems with that is a lot of times they'll just remove your combo pieces like Vizier of Remedies before you can get going, and this brings it back to play. And if you bring back, if you have your Vizier of Remedies out but not your Devoted Druid, you can bring back your Devoted Druid, give it haste, and get infinite mana the same turn with this. I don't think that's going to be worth it because it would force you into like 4 colors. I'm just saying, like, I can see a lot of synergies in Modern with this card that make it super interesting and probably the most likely to be good in Modern. So like I said, I think the number 4 card, Scavenger Grounds, is probably more likely than this to see a lot of play in Modern, but probably not as likely to be an important piece to those decks. And I think this is going to be an important piece to some decks potentially, maybe even decks that don't exist yet. So anyway, so that's the top 10. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And quickly, I'm going to show you the last slide, just all the cards in a row. Number 10, Hostile Desert. Number 9, Supreme Will. Number 8, Leave to Chance. Number 7, Striped Riverwinder. Number 6, Uncage the Menagerie. Number 5, Nimble Obstructionist. Number 4, Scavenger Grounds. Number 3, Solemnity. Number 2, Room Map Excavator. Number 1, Claim to Fame. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you like this kind of content. Let me know if there are cards that I missed that are super good that should be on this list. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, Bobgar here. I just really wanted to quickly say, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you enjoy my content in general and would like to see more of it, subscribe. I'll be coming out with more content in the future. And please leave me comments and let me know what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, both in terms of production and in terms of my play and my deck building and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.